Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our budget webinar today. Today we are here to talk about budgeting, the hows, the whens, and most importantly, the whys. I know this year has been very difficult for all business owners, and going into the last quarter of the year, it is more important than ever to budget appropriately based on the new normal you've been dealing with over the last 6 months. We've got cold weather approaching, and we're still dealing with these limited seating capacity restrictions. So we need to be identifying realistic sales basis and the necessary costs behind it. Shockingly, many business owners aren't working off a budget, and this became really apparent over the last 6 months when the pandemic hit. So this is why we're here today, to discuss the importance of a budget and how this can and will assist with managing cash flow, debt service, and ideally increasing profitability. My name is Sydney Lynn. I'm joined here today with Brian McCaig. Brian and I are both client advisors at RSI. For those of you that don't know and are not familiar with our company, Restaurant Solutions Incorporated is a cost-effective restaurant management and accounting system and service for independent restaurant owners, quick service franchises, and larger single and multi-unit concepts. Our mission for the last 20 years has been to help business owners like yourselves in providing the data and financial understanding that you need to create actionable insights and ultimately, again, increase profitability, which will be a theme for the day. So the purpose of our call is, first, we are going to determine how a budget is going to benefit your restaurant and your operators. Secondly, we want to establish the best place to start and how to set those realistic budget targets. We're also going to review some smart budgeting tactics. And finally, we're going to determine the barriers that might be preventing you from completing a budget and some potential solutions so you can get this budget in place, especially going into next year. So with that, I think it's a perfect time for our first poll question. So Brian, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, let's do it. And we're actually going to do a couple of these poll questions throughout the presentation today. You'll get a chance to answer, and we'll get a chance to share the results and talk about the answers as well. This is also a good time for me to bring up, there's a Q&A section of the webinar where you can ask questions to us directly, and we're going to try to save some time at the end of the presentation today to cover some of those questions. So we'd encourage you, get those questions in. The more questions that come in, the more fun we tend to have with this. So that being said, let me get the first question, poll question, up on your screen. It should be up there now, and we're really just honestly trying to get a feel for the room. Do you currently have a budget in place? It should be up and ready for you to answer now. You may say, yeah, I have a strategic budget in place. You may say, yes, I have a budget, but I would like it to be more strategic. You may say, no, I currently don't have one, but I'd like to get one started. Or you may say, no, I don't have one and I never will. And that's a test right there. If that's your answer, we're going to try to convince you otherwise by the end of this presentation today. It looks like most of our, let's see, yep, we have most of our attendees have gotten their answers in. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results. Sid, what do you think? A lot of people have a budget in place. It looks like the majority have a budget in place but would like it to be more strategic. That's probably fair. A lot of people are happy with their budget. Here's the really good news. There's nobody who's not willing to get a budget in place. So you came to the right place.
Probably why they're here today.
Probably why they're here today. Let's get on. All right. So size doesn't matter, really. So what Sid and I have found is that whether a restaurant does 1 million or 5 million in sales, the percentage of decrease in cost and retained earnings is actually almost always the same. There's just as much money left on the table in large organizations as there is in small ones. In addition, that purpose of a weekly budget, hopefully you're anticipating, monitoring, and making adjustments on the metrics that management has control over. And the effectiveness of that weekly budget is driven by actions taken every single day in the restaurant. So this goes back to the operators. And Sid, you've had some really good strategies with restaurants you've been working with, especially this year, related to zero-based budgeting, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I work with clients, we build these annual budgets, and we make adjustments to it quarterly, but then COVID hit, and that annual budget that we had in place went completely out the window. So what we really started to strategize and focus on was doing more of a zero-based budgeting model. So for those of you that don't understand what a ZB is, it's a method of budgeting in which all expenses must be justified for each week and new period. The process of doing a zero-based budgeting really starts from that zero base, and every function within an organization is analyzed for its needs and costs. This really does help allow for more strategic allocation of planned spending. It's been very effective for restaurant owners during the pandemic when they had to pivot their business models completely, really working that on a week over week, almost to a point of a break-even analysis to that point on this. I definitely highly recommend that as we are continuing to navigate this new normal we're faced with.
Yeah, thank you, Sid. I think that's been especially effective during the pandemic for a lot of the restaurants you've been working with, I know. Okay, so back to key points regarding the budgeting. So let's get back to what the operators can do once they have a budget in place. And the most successful managers at controlling costs are using that budget as a starting point for managing the costs they have the largest impact on. And operators can forecast sales using a combination of budget, recent sales trends, year-over-year sales trends, weather, and sales-affecting events to project those weekly sales. And from that, hopefully, they can use forecasting to adjust their ordering levels and par levels and staffing levels every single week. And those par levels and staffing levels are crucial when it comes to forecasting for managers. But Sid, there's also considerations to be made in regards to forecasting for cash flow for owners and controllers as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When you over forecast sales or even under budget labor and cost targets, this could actually lead to a false sense of security on profitability and cash flow. So for owners and investors, misbudgeting can actually impact capital investment planning, future growth plans, etc. So when you're forecasting sales right now, instead of maybe the traditional method of calculating based off of your square footage, you actually want to start thinking of basing this off of revenue generated by seat, especially as we go into these colder weather months and you may lose even more available seats. Look at the history of your recent off-premise sales, what marketing plans you have going into fourth quarter, and then have an idea of exactly what each seat generates in revenue per guest, and then be able to identify about how many turns you're going to get on those, and that will help you identify a more realistic sales target. Another practice that you want to make sure that you do is a break-even analysis on your current business model, what's happening right now. This is a great place to start with building a budget and actually identifying those necessary costs. But I think a lot of people, that don't do budgets are questioning, do budgets really work? So Brian, what do you say to that?
Okay, let's see, does a budget really work? And what Sid and I have seen is that operators who set specific measurable goals for improvement and create a budget to hit those goals are far more likely to see better results. That may be kind of a no-duh moment for you, but we've actually put some numbers behind this in our research as well. And in reviewing restaurant financials, we compared the clients who used a budget tool versus those who did not. And we looked at things like revenue, discounts, labor costs, gross profit, and all the way down to cash flow. And spoiler alert, big surprise, I'm sure, the restaurants who utilized a solid budget performed better on every indicator. That's why we're doing the presentation today. So budgets are always an important tool, but for 2020, there's a lot of challenges that restaurants have been facing, right, Sid?
Yeah, and honestly, we went into 2020 already expecting to have the typical challenges we're always faced, but obviously what really came into a factor for everybody in 2020 that was completely unexpected was the coronavirus. Obviously, with the coronavirus is on top of all of the other challenges of increased costs, and everything's been magnified due to the coronavirus. So you've been dealing and having to pivot in many directions. So whether it's been having to change up and streamline your menus or pivot entirely to off-premise sales or even change up actual labor models and job descriptions for your employees, it's been a year of change. And as we approach year end, you're now going to have to start thinking about the PPP loan forgiveness, your tax deferments, your end taxes, debt consolidation, understanding what these new loans are going to be that you might have. Now's the time that you need to take all of this information that you've gleaned over the last 6 months and start to really strategize for next year. And you've got to have a budget in place so you know if you're not only going to be, operationally successful, but are you going to be able to financially as well and be able to keep that cash flow strong and be prepared for any other, crazy, unexpected events that might occur going into 2021.
Who knows, right?
Who knows? So let's kind of dive into some of what those challenges are. I mean, obviously, we have the prime costs. Our labor cost is always a big one. It goes without saying, this pandemic is an equal opportunist where no person, no business has been immune to its effects. And minimum wage, you're still dealing with increases on that. You're going to have that going up into January as well. We've also seen post-COVID hourly rates are actually increasing across the board, across many states. And this is going to continue to be a factor going into next year. Labor has also had a huge impact on your overall prime cost. So understanding your ideal labor cost, but more importantly, managing it on a daily basis is key. And a budget will help you understand what those weekly labor targets should be so your managers can make sure that they're hitting those targeted goals. Staffing challenges have always been there. I know earlier in the year, pre-COVID, heart of house, trying to find line cooks, back of house employees, prep cooks was a challenge, but now it's going to be even more difficult as we're struggling to get people back to work. This is going to continue to be a challenge going into next year because a lot of restaurant workers are actually pivoting, going into other areas of employment outside of the restaurant industry. But now that you've kind of, pivoted, you understand kind of a bit more of what your actual labor requirements are. This is going to really help you assess how that needs to go into that longer haul going into next year as you stabilize your business model, et cetera. In addition to labor, obviously, we've got costs. Prime cost of goods is always going to be an issue. We were already seeing it, again, increased pricing on commodities due to food shortages. Across the country, restaurants are paying higher prices for key ingredients with unpredictable weather. And this is going to continue to impact your costs. I mean, look what happened to Iowa and the corn crops just a month ago with that crazy land hurricane. So just note that your supply chain is going to continue to be an issue. They're going to be making adjustments accordingly, and you're going to need to adjust with that as well. Farmers are having to pull down their crops because they can't sell it. So be able to pivot on your menu offerings to maximize your cost efficiencies. Pay attention to those price fluctuations, make adjustments to pricing when needed, and make sure your menu is your recipes so you know what your ideal cost is and budget strategically around that. Now, obviously, a lot of people were affected when it came to the capital side of things. You can't plan for the pandemic. So, when budgeting, make sure that unexpected costs are always going to rise and you have to plan for them. Planning for this is key. So understand that your actual cost might be higher than initially budgeted. Make sure that you've got a plan for that and make sure that when you're building your budget, you give yourself a cushion. So if you have something like the pandemic hit, it's not as negatively impacting your cash flow when it does. So start working now on identifying how you're going to recover financially going into next year, how much capital you're going to need to get back to business normal. Start strategizing if you haven't already done so to make sure you've got to break even, what your debt service is going to be, what you have to hit in sales every week to cover not only operations but that debt service, and start working on building that cash reserve. So hopefully we've let you know how important a budget is, but how do we start building it? Brian, how can we help them dive into building this budget?
Yeah, like you said, Sid, now we've convinced you the importance of your budget, so where should you start? And with any business decision, you should make sure that you're balancing the needs of your business. I'm a big fan of the decision-making triangle to keep you honest here. With any business decision you make, ask yourself, is this decision having a positive impact on my guests, my team, and my profits? If the answer is no to any of those, you need to reconsider or reframe the activity. Whenever you're going through decisions like this, I like brainstorming sessions. I like getting questions going so that you can make decisions from there. So here's some suggestions for some questions to get started with. So first things first, how much profit do you believe you can realistically earn from your operation in the next year? I love hearing really optimistic goals, but I want you to be realistic. Check out the word realistic here and lean in on that. If you really are going to have an aggressive profitability goal, make sure you reverse engineer it and put in the metrics to get to where you're trying to achieve a profit. Number two, what are 3 areas that can potentially have the greatest impact on reducing your costs? Involve your whole team in this activity. You're going to be surprised at their candor if you involve them in the process. Get them talking about, hey, I really think we can improve waste and food cost, or hey, we don't need to staff this much on Tuesday nights. It's kind of a dud. Get them involved in that decision. They'll have a little more buy-in. Number 3, and this starts to go towards the triangle. So how will the reduction in costs for these areas impact the guest experience? And you always have to think, hey, if I'm going to put this super aggressive labor target in for my operational labor, is that going to have a negative impact on the guest? And talk that over in a brainstorming session as well. Continuing on with the triangle, any decision or budget you make, how is it going to affect your employees as well? Make sure it's still good for your team. Number 5, what are 2 ideas that you have for increasing your revenue? And I love this one, especially this year, trying to make, lemonade out of lemons. The restaurants that are doing the best right now are reemphasizing their role in the community. And there are a lot of really cool stories about providing, schools and senior centers with meals. And I love it because not only are you doing good in your community, but you're also getting your name out there. Sydney, I know you had some stories about getting involved in the community as well.
Yeah, a large part of it too is just really trying to leverage your media. The local news stations are clamoring for news, so reach out to them. Tell them how you're making it through and surviving, this new crazy normal that we're dealing with. Make sure that you are reaching out to each and every single person and getting in their face as much as possible, because as we all know, sales is the thing that we're all worried about the most. We're not hitting last year's numbers. We don't, we have these limited restrictions. So make sure you throw out all standard rules of marketing strategies, put those aside. You need to leverage every single type of media, every level channel, consider all levels of social media. The clients that have been the most successful and bouncing back to getting back to kind of business normal pre-COVID are the ones that have really gone strong on their marketing. So when you are budgeting right now, make sure that you don't cut all your marketing costs. You actually need to keep marketing as a strong line item in your budget. You got to make sure it's smart, but you've got to make sure you're staying on top of the marketing, because you have to get that top line revenue to cover those fixed expenses.
And take advantage of that social media, the cheaper marketing as well, and be loud about the good you're doing in your community. It's been really, personally, it makes me decide which restaurants I'm going to go to when I see that on social media. All right, number 6, how will these ideas increase your bottom line without affecting your guests and your employees in a negative way? And this one really brings the triangle full circle, or full triangle. So really, is it good for your guests? Is it good for your team? And is it good for your profit with any budgeting setting you're doing? And as we're talking through budgeting and goal setting, you also want to make sure you're being smart about it. And we mentioned the SMART strategy to any goals you're saying. And for those of you who don't know, SMART is an acronym that is out there in the business world that's a good way to help you with goal setting strategies. And it's an acronym that starts with S, so specific. I want you to improve profit, or I want to improve food costs. No, that's way too general. I want you to be specific about what you want to improve. Something that sounds better would be, I want to reduce my produce costs by 3 points by ordering produce tighter and improving waste. Be specific and make sure it's measurable. So the M stands for measurable. A good example of this, a goal I hear all the time from restaurants I'm working with is, I want to give better service, or I want to make my guests happier. And that's great. I want you to find a way to measure that so that you can see if you've made progress here. So do you have a way to obtain and quantify feedback in a measurable way? That's crucial here. So it might be guest surveys. It might be, you have friends come in with gift cards and do secret shops. There's a lot of ways you can measure guest experience is one example, but whatever goal you're putting in place, make sure you can measure it. All right, the A stands for attainable. And is this a goal your managers can achieve? Is it a realistic, attainable goal? You don't want it to be demotivating, right, Sid?
Yeah, absolutely. I see this happen a lot. Business owners like, okay, I want to hit 20% labor, and the managers are struggling. Like, there's no way. They've cut everything they possibly can. They're at bare bones capacity. They're still not being able to hit that 20% target goal. So to your point, Brian, they get demotivated. If it's something that there's just no way that they're ever going to achieve, if you're budgeting for a 30% food cost, but it's engineered at 35, they're not going to buy into it. They're not going to work towards it. There's no incentive for them. So make sure that they're always attainable, so that way they feel like they can strive for it and achieve it.
Love it. All right, let's get on with R. So R stands for relevant. And when I think of this for restaurants, this is any changes, any goals, any budgets you're putting in place. I want to make sure that it still passes the test of aligning with your overall culture and expectations you're setting. You're in business with a core value. Make sure that any goals you're putting out there are still aligned with that. And lastly, the T stands for time bound. This kind of goes with what I was talking about in specific, but you have to put a due date on your goal. So rather than saying, I'm going to improve my food cost by 3%, say by Q2 or by year end, or even better, get some extra credit in my book, put incremental improvements over time. If you're looking for a big improvement and you want to improve 4 or 5 percentage points on one specific category, maybe you do a little bit Q1, a little bit more Q2, a little bit more Q3. You'll find that feels a lot easier to wrap your head around as a management team when you're trying to achieve those goals. And you don't have to do it all overnight. You don't have to make the big, huge leap overnight if you put those incremental improvements over time. That being said, Sid, for budgeting, we also have some rules that go along with this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, don't overthink it. I apply the KISS theory on this one. Keep it simple. Make sure that you are going through all the line items, all of your different cost categories. Make sure that you are, understanding exactly what falls into them, et cetera, but you don't have to overthink it. You review historical data and information on your financial statements. That can be a good basis to start with. Number two, don't go too far back. I see it too much. Or like, oh, well, a year ago, 2 years ago, that's almost too far back. For long term, you do want to look at year over year as a starting basis for future months. But for short term, right now, you want to actually be looking over the last 6 months for the next quarter. And then, kind of seeing a morph of that going into next year. So it's going to be a little bit different going into 2021 and being able to really identify, what you potentially will hit when it comes to, everything that we've been dealing with. But you're going to be right now using a combination, obviously, of last year's sales with taking some of the data that you've achieved, you received over the last couple of months to apply to that as well. Also look what's going into within your state right now and in the future. What's going on with the capacity restrictions? Stay on top of all of that information, because that will apply to what you budget for moving forward. And number three, Brian said it earlier, but be realistic when building a budget. Don't over budget. Don't put a sales target that is just never going to be able to achieve. That's going to inaccurately reflect your net profitability and what that percentage basis is on all of your fixed expenses. So make sure that you keep it realistic and attainable. There's definitely some industry standards on prime costs, and a lot of people ask about, okay, well, what should I budget for food costs, or what should I budget for liquor costs or beer costs, etc. And again, there's not a specific industry standard when it comes to costs. That's something that you will determine based off of what your pricing is and what what you've costed out your ideal items to. So with that, it's all going to be very state specific, county, local specific when you are dealing with your prime costs when it comes to industry standards. But I think that leads right into our next question, Brian. So let's have another poll question.
Time for another poll question, my favorite part. Okay. And this is a question that Sydney and I get a lot, and it's who should be involved in writing a budget? Should it be just the owner CFO, the general manager, the assistant manager, the chef, or all of the above? And I see an overwhelming result in the poll questions coming in already. So good job. A lot of you were paying attention. I'm going to give everybody a little bit more time to get in. It looks like we have just over half of our participants answering so far. Sydney, you're going to be shocked at the results here.
I hope not.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results. For how many people are joining this webinar today, this is pretty cool that every single person got it right. I don't know if I've ever seen 100%.
I haven't either. I can't tell you how many restaurant owners I work with that do the budget and they don't talk to anybody else. They don't talk to their manager. So this makes me very happy.
So great job. That is the correct answer. Really, you see more progress if you get everybody involved here. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So again, we've convinced you to do a budget. Now the question is really what's stopping you? And those people who have worked with me before know I'm a big to-do list, guys, and I love that feeling of checking off a task on my to-do list. But there's always that little task that lingers there for a while, right? And oh no, okay, I'll get to that one next week, or I'll get to that one at the end of the month. And I feel like if you're being honest with yourself, or a lot of the restaurant tours I've worked with, operational budgets can be one of these that linger on your to-do list if you don't know where to start. And back to Sydney's idea about keep it simple, the budget doesn't need to be complicated, right? Keep it simple. You can achieve a lot with a little with a real simple budget. If you're an RSI client, your team is made up of industry experts, and we are here to assist as you have questions or run into barriers while creating that budget. And back to the poll question, the poll results that you all did so well with your responses on, what we've seen is the most successful restaurants in implementing a budget include their team as part of the process. One of my favorite ways to do it with restaurants I've worked with is maybe stage one of budgeting starts with your operators, and they're giving you information on their key metrics, and then it goes to more of maybe the owner looks it over, or maybe the corporate team looks it over and gets that budget back with some feedback for the operators. Maybe there's another draft. Make it a process until you get that final budget for the year in place. By involving the team, you achieve a lot of things. You increase their buy-in towards those desired results you have. You strengthen that manager engagement. You improve workplace morale. Whether you know it or not, they really like being involved in that process. And you maximize your employee tenure by investing in the education and development of your team. Okay, so back to what's stopping you. If you are an RSI client, Remember, you have an operations specialist assigned to you to assist with the setup of that budget, to answer questions along the way, and to review that budget with you prior to submitting. So if you're an RSI client, schedule a call with your operations specialist to get this going. So let's say you go through all that and you still don't have the time.
Well, hopefully you'll make the time on this. Now, for those
go.
of you that are joining us today that are RSI clients, if you don't have the time, you don't know how, and something else is stopping you and preventing you from building the budget, then we do have those client advisory services like myself and Brian to help you and assist with that. So reach out to us and we'll definitely help you. For those of you that are not RSI clients, there are many tools out there that can help you with this. I strongly suggest that you start, again, with a break-even analysis to get a starting point on all of those cost categories, and then go a little bit further deeper into there from that. We have tools within our website as well, our marketing website that you guys can reach out to. But don't hesitate to reach out if you do have any questions, and we'll try and direct you to the appropriate places. I'm sure PRL and LA has also some budgeting spreadsheets or tools that can help you assist with that.
Love it. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our presentation, and I did see some questions come in. We were trying to keep this about half an hour, Sid. We did okay. We're right there. So we will try to get a couple of these questions in. I want to make sure everybody knows if you did get a question in that we didn't get a chance to share during this time right now, we'll answer you directly. We'll make sure we have your email address. We'll make sure we get those questions answered. Okay, that being said, there's definitely some that I think will be good to share with the class, Sid. So first things first, and I love this one, how often should I adjust my budget? And I love this one because I have a different answer now probably than I did if you asked me at the end of 2019. So let me start with my kind of rule of thumb with budgets. I like doing annual budgets, and I like having an annual budget at the end of the year, and you kind of just stick it there and pretend like it's stone and static and not going to change. And hey, yes, expenses are going to change throughout the year, but you're either doing better or worse than you budgeted for, and let that improve your next budget. But I really want you to think of that annual budget as, even if you're a single mom and pop restaurant, I want you to think of that as a promise to your investors of what you can do. And you're going to do your best to meet that promise. And then you either do better or do worse than that promise. But the worst thing you can do is change things along the way. Until 2020, I've totally changed my way of approaching budgets. Of course, that budget you put together at the end of 2019 has very little to do revenue-wise, expense-wise, with what you actually ended up doing in 2020, because you had to probably change your whole business model. Maybe you had to go to all-to-go, and maybe your sales are half of what they used to be, or 3/4 of what they used to be. There's a lot of implications there, and I want you to be able to forecast and plan for your cash flow. So it makes a lot of sense in 2020 especially to change that budget along the way. But normally I like sticking with a budget in normal years, if that makes sense. All right. Sid, here's one we get a lot as well. I'm going to send this your way because I know this is something you work with all your restaurants with. And the question is, should I include manager bonuses in my budgeting?
That is a great question. I do get this a lot. And I actually have a two-parter on this. So, when you do have bonus structures in place, incentive plans, for your management team, et cetera, first and foremost, I hope that you have this incentive plan built off of a budget, that they are actually working. It's not just you showed up to work today and I'm going to give you a bonus. Like, we want to make sure that any bonus or incentive plan that you do have is very specific to the targeted goals. And they, those are the benchmarks that they have to achieve that bonus. Now, my thoughts behind whether, yes, absolutely, you've got to, you want to plan and budget for being able to pay out bonuses 100%. But I want to make sure that you're savvy that, just because, if they're hitting a labor target, and, they hit that bonus for that quarter, and then that bonus, negatively impacts labor going into the next quarter. Are they having to make up extra, what they made up in the bonus to hit their targeted labor cost goal in the next quarter? That can sometimes be a negative impact. So what my recommendation would be is make sure that you don't have bonus as a part of your overall fully burdened labor cost. Have that probably down below net operating income, maybe in other expenses. Obviously, it's a cost of business. But if you are bonusing management teams off of achieving specific targeted cost goals, I wouldn't recommend having a bonus be factored into negatively impacting that going into the next quarter. But 100%, it should be, hopefully the managers will hit those bonus targets and get those bonus all year round. And yes, absolutely budget for them.
Love it. Okay, we went a few minutes over, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. But like I said, if you had questions, there were some more questions that came in that we didn't get to. We'll be answering you directly on those. I want you to notice on your screen there, if you have any questions you didn't get a chance to ask, or if you just want to give us a call, our phone number is up there on the screen right now, the 303-458-1204, and then an email address that will get to us directly as well. Don't hesitate. No questions should go unasked, right?
Thanks so much for your time today. I hope we found
Bye, everyone.
this important. Bye-bye.
Thank you.